The Turbo and 2K Show. What's up, 2K crew? Yes, it is Thursday. It is that time of the week. We have a great show planned. So excited about this. In 2Ks, we're going big time.
Yeah.
We're going big time. I teased the folks watching already, which big shout out to you guys and gals that are watching us live. And do you think they're ready for this big surprise?
I think so.
Do you think so? Should we lay it on them? Boom, we got a ticker. We have a motherfucking ticker in the house. Bug's still being worked on, and we're gonna let it ride tonight. Let me know your thoughts. But yes, welcome and hello and welcome. We are coming to you live from the 643 studio here at the Marcellus News. Big shout out to Kay and the crew for having us. The link is in the description to subscribe to the Marcellus News. Get your virtual subscription or paper subscription. Like I said, big shout out to them for making this possible. And 2Ks. I find it kind of hard to believe this is our first kind of college hoops episode, but on the other hand, I can honestly believe it.
Yeah.
I can honestly believe it. Because there's just been so much other cool shit to talk about.
Well, and that's kind of the way it always goes. You know, you have the NFL and the college football. Well, you have the college football season, and then that wraps up, and then you have the end of the playoffs of the NFL start off, and then the Super Bowl. And let's just be honest, that the football just kind of trumps everything when the season's on, especially when we're coming right down to the end of both of those seasons. And then you have Major League Baseball that kind of is kicking off, spring training's going, and everybody knows that's kind of our favorite thing to talk on.
Absolutely.
And then college basketball, and I feel like with college basketball, especially here in recent years, we haven't really had like that powerhouse team that we talk about all season long. We have really good teams, and when they get to the top, it seems like it's pretty popular that they lose.
Yeah.
And then it kind of goes back and forth. Well, now our calendars have changed over to March, and now this is the time where we start really, everybody I think starts to kind of dig in. It's only going to be a couple weeks. We're going to start getting brackets out there. We got conference championships starting up next week.
Everything's going this week, don't we?
Yeah.
Just not the finals until next week.
Yep. So everything's really starting to kick off with it, and so I can't think of a better time to talk about it.
No, and you are absolutely right. And for those of you that are watching over on the YouTube, I want to say again, thank you. But go ahead and hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and the bell to get notified every time we go live. 2Ks, we're sitting at 254 subs. Can you believe it? 254 people give a shit about what we say.
Yeah.
Or at least follow instructions at least once, which we do appreciate. So if you're not subscribed, go ahead and hit that. Why not? It's free of charge. And heck, most of the time we don't even know who the subscriber is. And if you are on the audio side, which thank you guys and gals for continuing to download the show. Honestly, it's probably a 10-to-1 viewer to listener. So big shout out to you guys and gals. And like I said, give us a follow over there. Give us a follow. And before I forget, let me play our cool little, there we go, little subscribe thing. And if you are, guys and gals, are feeling extra saucy, you can always go to buyturbobeer.com, buy 2Ks and I a beer, which 2Ks provided these for us again tonight. And or you can buy a little boozy a beer, and you also get signed up for my weekly blog that I do, and you'll be financially helping the show, and you'll get a big shout out. So all in all, quick little bing bang boom, and everybody's happy. Everybody's happy. Well, 2Ks, I've got the show broken down where we're going to talk the state of the union college hoops right now. Then we're going to transition to the Big Ten. Then we're going to look ahead at a little bit of March Madness. And then we'll get into our top 5 of the week, which is top 5 sports teams of all time. 2Ks, let's start off with this. If we're going to talk about the state of the college hoops, we might as well talk about the rankings. And had I done a little bit more research, 2K crew, didn't realize that Houston was number 1 when I made the title, Is Houston Overrated? But kind of hard to be overrated when you're number 1, so that's on me. And this number 1 seed 2Ks we've kind of seen throughout the season. These number 1 seeds really don't hold on that long.
Yeah.
I mean, now granted, there hasn't been an undefeated team in quite some time this season, and we've got Houston number 1, Alabama's number 2. Alabama's had time at that number 1 seed. Kansas, UCLA, Purdue. I think Purdue spent the most time there. And then 6 Marquette, Baylor 7, Arizona 8, Texas, which I believe Texas has actually been the number 1 spot as well, followed by Gonzaga at 10. So of the top 10 2Ks, what are your thoughts? Is everyone kind of accurately portrayed here? And now granted, this is from 2 days ago via the NCAA March Madness official Twitter account. So if anything's going to be legit 2K crew, it's going to be this one. But to me, this is one of the harder years to actually put together. And I do have 11 through 25 too. But the thing that jumps out the page to me is Houston. I do believe Houston is the best team in the country right now. They've been, I want to say, floating in that top 5 pretty much all season. And now remember 2Ks, we started out the season with, was it North Carolina number 1?
Yeah.
And then they just took a gigantic shit. I mean, they're basically fighting for their tournament lives right now. So when we kind of poked at it a couple weeks ago, it's like, all right, are we going to have a March Madness that's kind of as insane as the football season? I think we're shaping up for it. What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree, and I totally agree with you. Where Houston is the number 1 team. I mean, of the basketball that I've watched this far, look, I think they have a little bit of that. They don't play anybody, the kind of that stigma going against them, kind of like the Gonzaga treatment that we've seen over the years, where Zaga has ran through their conference, but the question is, when it comes tournament time, who have they played? And you can kind of say the same thing about Houston, but for me, Houston has just they can't do anything about the schedule. The schedule is put in place. They have to play against their conference, and that's just how it goes. But they've completely wiped out everybody in their conference, and it's not like it's just one guy doing it, 2 guys doing it. They have 5 guys on their team that are all averaging in double figures. To me, it's out of all the games I've watched, and it's hard to get a gauge on it because you don't, the talent that they're playing against, compared to some of these other teams in the top 5, like your blue blood in Kansas right up there. They're not playing that same competition. But when you have 5 guys scoring double figures, to me, they're the best all-around offense, all-around defense. They're the best all-around college basketball team that I've seen to this point.
And I think they have the hottest coach going right now too, which doesn't hurt at all. At all. I mean, obviously record-wise, 27-2, and so that, I mean, the Kansas at number 2 is 25-5. So you can see that there's been a lot of turmoil going on. I mean, where historically there's usually it's a Duke team or a Kentucky team or even a Gonzaga team here recently that's just running away with everything. And I don't think that's the case. And I think we better get locked in for a pretty exciting March Madness. And I think this year, probably more than any, the seeding is going to be key. Whose side of the bracket are you in? Where are you seated? And I think that is going to be extremely important.
And one of the things I look at too when it comes tournament time, like I think we can kind of look right here and see Houston's going to be a 1 seed. Alabama's probably more than likely going to be a 1 seed. I think Kansas is going to be a 1 seed. And what I like about some of those other teams other than Houston is you have guys you have a Jalen Wilson on Kansas who has been around for a couple of years. He has the experience of playing in tournaments. His name is going to be right up there in the top 5 for Player of the Year, having a great season. And then when you look at that Alabama team, Brandon Miller, arguably the best player in college basketball this year. I mean, when you look at just NBA caliber talent, he probably trumps everybody out there. I mean, being that he's 6'9", he can step out on the perimeter and shoot. He can get to the basket. Probably one of the best players I've watched all year. But another team that's right now, as we look at it, not in the top 4, but right there at number 5 is Purdue. Got to look out for Purdue. Purdue has another player that probably right now if you're just looking at the odds, probably the favorite to win the National Player of the Year, and Zach Edey, who I believe 7'4", averaging 22, 23 points a game, 12 rebounds. I mean, it's just a monster. Your typical Big Ten post player that we see. It seems like the Big Ten has a 7-footer every year that is just that puts up numbers like this. But this is another kid that's been around for I think he's in his junior season right now. He's played big games. He's played in tournaments. So that's where when I look at this, some of these other top teams. Right now, I will stand here and say Houston is the best. They're the team to beat. But when the tournament starts, I like teams that have guys that have been there before, guys that have played in those big games. And sometimes when it comes to me picking, my bracket or who I think is going to win or upsets and all that, I like to go with the experience over just the pure talent.
Yeah, and I'm looking at CBS Sports here, and it's their Hey 19, whoever Hey 19 is, power rankings, and they have Houston number 1, Kansas number 2, UCLA number 3, Marquette 4, Bama 5, Zaga 6, and they don't have Purdue until number 18, which I find kind of shocking because they have Bradley over them. And no, Bradley was not ranked in this power rankings last week. But the reason that he has him last week, he had him at number 7, and his explanation is the Boilermakers plummet after their inability to put together 2 wins in a row in the past 3 weeks. Purdue's lost 4 of 6 and might drop 5 of 7 because its next game comes Thursday night against a feisty / desperate Wisconsin.
And it's very true. I mean, Purdue. If we go back 3 weeks ago, Purdue was the number 1 team in the nation. I mean, they looked like at the time the best team in college basketball. And here in the month of February, they just completely fell apart. They have not been playing near as well. They've not been shooting the ball near as well. The offense has not been near as good. But some of that is you have a Big Ten. That Big Ten conference is Purdue has went out and just kind of separated themselves. They did that in the beginning of the season to where everybody else is playing in this battle for second place.
Yeah.
And they're all not really all that much better than 500. Like we have, I think as of tonight, there's 8 teams right now that are all tied for that second place spot in the Big Ten. So what I think Purdue's running into is you have Purdue kind of can coast because they know that they're in. They know that they have a pretty good shot of being the number 1 seed. At worst, maybe a 2 seed. And they're going to win the Big Ten. So to me, them winning the Big Ten outright, they're at least going to be a 2 seed.
Mm-hmm.
So and then you have 8 teams in the Big Ten that are playing desperate. I mean, and you have no other choice at this point because it's not going to be a season like we've had in the past where you have 10 teams, 9 teams from the Big Ten making it. You have teams that are playing desperate right now just for a spot. I mean, we're watching it tonight with Michigan and Illinois. This is a huge game for both teams.
Which that is still at halftime, by the way. But no, you are 100% right when it comes to the Big Ten. Purdue with a conference record of 13-5. Then you have Michigan at 11-7, Indiana, Northwestern, Maryland, Iowa, all at 11-8. Illinois, Michigan State, and Rutgers at 10-8. So you've got, you're right, Purdue at 13-5. They're coasting, and you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 teams that are, for lack of better terms, kind of floundering at that very close to that 500 mark. So, yeah, we're not seeing I'm not going to say the dominance, but the depth of the teams in the Big Ten. And even if you look at the ACC is not as loaded as it has been here recently. So I was reading an article that said that this would be like the first time in 25 years that the ACC won't have multiple teams in like the top 5 seeds, which is kind of crazy to think because North Carolina always there, Duke always there, and if it wasn't for this little run that Duke's been on, I don't think they make it. Like we mentioned previous, North Carolina, they're treading water. They might not even make it. So for those of you that are really, really liking the fact that there's a lot of different teams, different faces showing up. I mean, hell, old buddy here has, after Gonzaga, he has Oral Roberts at number 7, Toledo at number 8, UConn. We haven't seen UConn relevant in college basketball in quite some time. St. Mary's seems to always be in the dance. Texas A&M, San Diego State. He has Texas all the way down at 16, which, man, Texas had to start the season was, I mean, they were high on a lot of people's lists. A lot of people, I mean, granted, the whole coaching thing, how that new coach has actually came in and kind of kept the ship righted, I guess you could say, is absolutely phenomenal. Because you could totally see that that whole thing just kind of turning. It was in the same article here, 2Ks. It wasn't 25 years. I completely lied. Maybe it was. Here's what's at stake. If no ACC team is seated between numbers 1 and 4, that would be a first. This year is setting up to be the worst seeding situation the ACC has ever had at the top. So I guess it's not 25. Not in terms of bids, but in terms of best seeded teams in the lowest spot. The previous highest total between the two best seeded ACC teams, 10. Last year, Duke was number 2, UNC was number 8, and we all know how that ended up. In 2021, Virginia and FSU were both 4 seeds, which was its feeblest showing at the top to that point in history. So there's a lot of teams, 2Ks, that we're used to traditionally seeing at the top here that really haven't been playing very well.
Yeah. But the thing with the ACC and kind of like, you know, when I look at the Big Ten and it's all kind of packed in there. To me, I only see one team in the Big Ten that can go on a run and potentially win it all, and that's Purdue. Yeah. I don't think any of these other teams are at that point to where when I look at the ACC, you have Virginia up there at the top, you have Miami up there at the top. I think Virginia has the potential to go. They can make a run. They have the talent on that team to do it, and even Duke. Duke is we're seeing it's obviously a new era there. You don't Coach K's not there anymore. It's handed off to John Shire as the new coach now. Duke has the talent, and they're super young. And I think when you have a group of so many freshmen, and they have a couple upperclassmen that mix in there, but for the most part, their team is built up out of a bunch of freshmen. Some of the most talented players in all of college basketball, but just don't have the time of playing together. That some of these other teams have. Well, they're getting hot now at the right time, and this is a team going into the tournament that, especially the way that they've been playing here in the last 2-3 weeks, I don't think very many teams want to match up against them. They're a team that can go on and win it. So when I look at the ACC, when I look at the Big 12, some of the other power conferences, PAC, I see multiple teams in those conferences that can go on and win this. But when I look at the Big 10, it's almost like it's a one team that can go all the way, and I don't know if any of the other teams are at this point built strong enough, ready enough to go on a run and win it.
What really kind of scares me about Purdue 2Ks is how are they going to officiate EB? Mm-hmm. That's an unknown. I mean, traditionally we see the Big Ten officials let them pound a little more, let them play a little bit more physical, but that's an honest concern.
Sure.
That's an honest concern.
And like you said, I think when it comes to the Big Ten, the way that they officiate games is they just let teams maul you. I mean, so a big guy like Edey, to me, when it gets to be tournament time, I think he's going to get more calls. Mm-hmm. He's going to get to the free throw line more. So to me, I think the advantage goes to if you have a strong big, especially we're talking maybe the best player in all of college basketball. As your big man going into the tournament, I think it's nothing but benefits you because they're going to call more fouls when the tournament starts. When you have so many eyes watching this tournament, offense is what puts people in the seats. Offense is what puts people turning on the TVs to watch this. They're not going to allow one of the best players, maybe the player of the year, to just get handled down there and not get calls. So. That's why he's a big reason why I say Purdue is they're built and they're ready to potentially make a run in this.
Well, I mentioned I had the 11 through 25 rankings. They've got Kansas State 11, Tennessee 12, Virginia 13, UConn 14, Indiana 15, Miami 16, St. Mary's 17, San Diego State 18, Xavier 19, Provo 20, Maryland 21, TCU 22, Kentucky 23, Texas A&M 24, and Pittsburgh 25. And I forgot I had this one too, Case. We've been talking about the Blue Bloods and kind of where the teams we're used to or accustomed to seeing at the top of this list. And this is from College Basketball Report on Twitter. Top 25 college basketball programs in the last decade since 2023. Virginia's number 1, UNC 2, Kansas 3, Duke 4, Gonzaga 5, Michigan 6, Kentucky 7, Virginia 8, Wisconsin 9, Sparty 10, Louisville 11, Baylor 12, UCLA, which I think is more recently than going back to like 2003, 2004 style, Oregon 14, Florida 15, and that's, since their run in the early 2000s. Syracuse 16, Arizona 17, Texas Tech 18. I think that's, who the hell is that? Can't even see it. Purdue 20, Houston 21, Arkansas 22, Oklahoma 23, Xavier 24, and Wichita State 25. Which Wichita State really hasn't been prevalent here lately, but if you look back, man, they had some good teams. They had some good teams. But we kind of, like I said, I probably should have, that's on me for being a bad host. I probably should have started off with that, and then we could have kind of compared where things are now compared to that. But better late than never, right? Better late than never. So yeah, that's pretty much where we're at. We kind of brought you guys and gals up to speed, and we, in essence, we kind of broke down the Big Ten. But let's do a little bit deeper dive here, and I kind of gave you the rankings, except didn't go down to old Minnesota, who has 1 win in the conference, and out of all these teams, 2Ks, if other than Purdue, if one team could make a run, and I'm not saying reaching the final or the championship game, but maybe that shocker Cinderella, because pretty much we can draw the line at Michigan State and up, because Michigan State is on the bubble, one of the last 4 in.
Probably Rutgers. As you're looking at this, you got. I think you take all the 10 and 8 teams and go up from there. So you got Rutgers sitting at 18 and 11. Penn State at 9 and 10 in the conference. That's probably from them down are the teams that I don't think have a chance. But when I look at after Purdue, to me it's got to be Indiana. Indiana that can. I don't think Indiana is a Final Four team. I don't think that but I think they're a team that could possibly get to Elite Eight, Sweet 16 team, just because of that Trace Jackson Davis are one of the best players in the nation too, and he's just kind of put that team on his back to where they're that's when you I can't say it enough, when you get to the tournament, when you have that one guy that you can just rely on, and he's been that guy for them all year, the guy that gets them 20 points plus every single game, gets them 10, 12 rebounds every single game. Like, he's a guy that you can rely on. He's a guy that single-handedly has won a lot of games for them here. And so to me, when you go through the first 2 rounds of the tournament, all it really takes is you can really ride off of one guy. One guy gets hot, he can get you through that first weekend. And then when you get to that, then you better have your whole team, because now you're going to get into the best of the best. Yeah. To where I think Purdue, they have that entire team where they can make the run and win it all. Indiana is probably my next team where I say I think there's multiple teams in the Big Ten that can get to the Sweet 16, that can get to the Elite Eight. I think Indiana would be my favorite team to see.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, we do have a comment here since we're talking about the Big Ten. It's from a Facebook user, and I think I know who it is. For those of you that are not do not follow or subscribe to the blog, I wrote my blog this week was, should Michigan State move on from Tom Izzo? And I wrote this with you in mind, 2Ks, because I know your, I'm not going to say disdain. I mean, that's kind of a harsh word. But maybe overrated status, maybe worn out welcome status. And
I know he's wore out his welcome with everybody except for Michigan State fans. Yeah. Michigan State fans still ride and die on that guy. They always will. And look, the love that Izzo has for the University of Michigan State, like as an outsider looking in, like you have to respect that. Like there's very very few people that bleed for a university than Tom Izzo does for Michigan State. Like that guy absolutely adores everything that there is about Michigan State, and I think he's earned the right to walk away whenever he's ready to walk away, and I don't think anybody can make that decision for him. I think he's earned that right. Mm-hmm. But god damn, do I think he's overrated? Absolutely, I think he's overrated. I think everybody just somehow remembers with him what he did in the late 90s, what he did in the early 2000s, and from that point on, what has he done? I mean, I can remember what has it probably been 5 years ago when they beat that big Duke team, the Zion, R.J. Barrett, Cameron Reddish, those guys. That was a great Duke team, and Michigan and Izzo was able to get his team through and beat them, get it into the Final Four. But other than that, what the fuck have they done? I mean, and people still talk like as soon as the calendar flips over to March, it's like, it's Izzo time. Like we're in March now, and almost like this team is like bulletproof when the month of March starts, and I'm like, what? I don't see it anymore. So, and have you ever seen more of a fucking crybaby bitch than Tom Izzo? Because I haven't. Have you ever seen somebody that looks so fucking miserable every single day that he's at work? Because I haven't. Like, he fucking whines and cries and is screaming and yelling at a player or somebody on that sideline all the time. Mm-hmm. It's hard to watch.
Yeah, and my kind of argument was pretty much the same. You know, they won the national title 99-2000. So we're going on 23 years since Michigan State's had a championship. Now the year after that, Final Four, year before that, Final Four. Didn't make it back to the Final Four until 04-05. And then lost in the first round, lost in the second round. Sweet 16 was the runner-up in 08-09. Final Four, 09-2010. Lost in the first round, Sweet 16, Elite 8, Final Four. 2015 and 16, lost in the first round. 16-17, lost in the second round. As well as 2017 and 2018. And then they made it to the Final Four in 2018-2019. And of course, there wasn't a tournament in 1920, and then they were one of the first four out in 20 and 21. In 21-22, they lost in the second round. So kind of a mixed bag. I mean, but the one thing you can see there, 2Ks, is they're constantly making the tournament. Mm-hmm. And I guess that in my eyes, you know, it's hard for me to put Izzo up there with Coach K and with a lot of these other, like Boeheim, Coach Wright, that are making Elite Eights every single year, it seems like. Even Calipari. Mm-hmm. They all have more than one championship. Mm-hmm. Boeheim has one, But as far as the top echelon, the creme de la creme, that's where I think Izzo needs more than one. He's made it to the Final Four a bunch of times. He's made it to they were the runner-up after winning one. And I'm right there with you where he's earned the right to step down whenever he wants. Whenever he wants. I have no problem with that. But if I'm a Michigan State fan, he's built this program to where just making it to the dance is not good enough. And to me, that's what would irritate me. Mm-hmm. But especially the society we live in, where we see coaching turnover, probably way more often than we should. Mm-hmm. Which leads me to...
Well, and I think what we've seen with Michigan State is, look, Izzo is loved and adored because of what he did in the early 2000s, because mm-hmm. of what he did when he first came in there, that the national championship run, all the Final Fours that he made in the 90s. And it's worked at Michigan State. It's worked. The fans have sucked that shit up, and they love everything about it, to where if you go out of Michigan State and look at a lot of these other universities, it's not, what have you done for me? It's, what are you doing for me right now? And that's what we're starting to see. And as a college basketball fan, and when I look at it and see it, I'm like, I love that shit because I think I'm a firm believer. Like when you go on a run and you're one of the best, like Tom Izzo is a Hall of Fame college basketball coach. Absolutely, I won't argue that with a second. When you go through a decade and you dominate at whatever, if you're a player, you're a coach or whatever, you go through a whole decade of time and you completely dominate that time, you're a Hall of Famer in my book. And that's where I agree. I think that you've earned that right. And with some other situations that you see, like we see coaches all the time that they dominate for a certain amount of time, and then all of a sudden you have 3, 4, 5 bad years, or not bad years, but years where you don't make a run in the tournament or you don't win something, and your seat just keeps on getting hotter and hotter. And every fan base is different.
Sure.
And I think coaches are going to be compared a little bit different. If you look at Michigan, I think coaches are going to be compared to differently than what they are at Michigan State. I mean, we see it with Harbaugh. Harbaugh, when he came in football, when he came over, was winning 9, 10 games, and it wasn't good enough because he wasn't beating Ohio State, and he wasn't winning in a bowl game, and he wasn't getting to the playoff. It wasn't good enough. But anywhere else, it would have been. I mean, you win 10 games at any college football, other than Alabama and Georgia.
It's a good
10
season.
games is a damn good season. But because Michigan, and the spotlight is bigger, there's a lot more eyes on you, and there's a lot more, that's going to be said, to where Michigan State kind of goes under the radar. It's not talked about near as much. So, I'm a firm believer. He has earned the right to walk away whenever he wants to walk away. But those years of Michigan State being a powerhouse, just dominant college basketball team with him as the head coach, I think they're past us. And I think that kind of happened too. I mean, when you look at it, when was Tom Izzo dominating college basketball? When Michigan really didn't have anything going for him. It was when John Beilein took over as the head coach at Michigan. All of a sudden, I think we started to see more players sway towards Michigan. I mean, look at some of the top end talent that Michigan has had since the Beilein era started. I mean, it's very comparable, and now we're seeing it with Juwan Howard. I don't know. I still don't think Juwan Howard is the coach that Beilein was, but he can recruit, and he's bringing in that top-end talent. Now, his problem is being able to keep guys around to play for more than 1 year, and he hasn't been able to get a point guard to this time yet. But I think that's kind of closed the gap on Izzo. Is the other team in the state. Probably at this point right now, Michigan is the better basketball program than Michigan State at this point, as far as what have they done here in recent time.
Well, the Facebook user asks, "Hot seat Howard?" ?
I mean, it hasn't been great. We can't sit here and I can't sit here and lie to you about it. It hasn't been great, but with the talent that he's had coming in, I mean, you have to imagine it's going to change. It's going to change. You can't keep on bringing in that amount of talent. But for me, he's got to get a point guard, and he's got to get a point guard that's going to stick around, and maybe he has that. We have the McDaniel kid right now who in the beginning of the season was not consistent at all, but this last couple weeks, Michigan's been playing their best basketball the whole year, and it's because of him. I mean, he started to play really, really good the last 2 weeks, so maybe he's the guy that they can keep around for 2-3 years and keep in there. But for me, Michigan's been changing point guards every single year since Juwan Howard's been there.
Sometimes 2 in 1 year.
Yeah, and this year they've used the transfer portal for their point guard. And this year, the guy that they got off the transfer portal for their point guard only played for about 2 weeks before he tore his ACL, so he was out for the season. So, no, I don't. If you're asking me, do I think he's on the hot seat? No, I don't think he's on the hot seat at all. I think he's got a legit shot if he's able to, potentially pull off a game tonight against Illinois, and they have a game against Indiana this weekend. If he's able to win those games, he's probably going to punch his ticket.
That's kind of what the bracketology was talking about. Is that Michigan does need 2 big wins. And speaking of bracketology 2Ks, let's jump into the next segment here in the madness. Yes, bracketology has already come out. We have, I think it is Andy Katz put these together. Let's talk about the Midwest. And now these are, to me, this is always, it's so hard to tell where any of these teams are going to end up. But this is Andy Katz. He's got Kansas at the number 1 seed, Marquette number 2, Gonzaga 3, Miami 4, San Diego State 5, Northwestern 6, TCU 7, Illinois 8, Providence 9, Florida Atlantic. Was that the team that did the Lob City? Was that Florida Atlantic years ago? I think it was.
It might have been.
Got them at number 10. 11, Auburn. 12, Oral Roberts. 13. God damn it, they just had Toledo. 14, Utah State. 15, Colgate. And 16, Morehead State. Not Less Head, but Morehead State. Where every guy wants to go, Morehead. So that's kind of how he sees the Midwest going, and we also see too that what's Kansas number 1 seed, and we have 1, 2. Northwestern's making the dance. That's cool. Mike Wilbon will be pumped for that, and against a number 11 Auburn team where they could get a win. He's going to jump out of his shoes, 2Ks. He's going to jump out of the mock turtleneck he was wearing today. So we got two Big Ten teams in the Midwest. Let's jump over to the West. Houston's the number 1 seed here, which I think rightfully so. And I honestly think that when the season's said and done, Houston will be the number 1 overall seed because I'm with you. I think they're the most complete team.
I don't see him losing another game.
No. And the fact that the argument you put forth that they don't play anybody, I think is bullshit because this team is just that good. And
well, we've had no problem making Gonzaga the number 1 overall team, and the same argument can be made.
Yeah. UCLA 2, I'm not going to go through all of them, 2K crew, but Houston 1, UCLA 2, K-State 3, Xavier 4. And there's Iowa's the only Big Ten rep in this one, so that's 3 so far. Let's go down south. Alabama number 1. And Baylor 2. Arizona 3. Indiana 4. There's a Big Ten. And they've got Rutgers at 9. So there's 4, 5. Michigan State 7. So there's 6. So Big Ten's representing in Andy Katz's prediction here in the South 2Ks. And then again, I think Alabama well-deserved number 1 seed, well-deserved number 1 seed. And I put the same one on here twice. So hold on, let me fix it. There. East has Purdue number 1. Texas 2, and Tennessee 3, UConn 4, Virginia 5. Just looking at this one, and Duke 7. This is kind of like that death bracket. I mean, this is the side that seems to be loaded, and I think unfortunately Purdue's getting kind of shafted on this one. But see, there's 1, 2.
Which is probably right because as we look at it right now, and Purdue's probably the last team in as far as the last number 1 seed.
So there's Purdue and Maryland from the Big Ten. So it's at 8 or 9. The Andy Katz has going in for the Big Ten. Yeah, I think this is the death bracket here. I mean, this one's loaded. I mean, you could honestly. I could see Virginia making a big run in this. I could see Maryland making a run, Tennessee making a run, Texas making a run, even Duke.
Mm-hmm.
Even Duke. So, I mean, there's any of the top 7 or 8 teams here could really make a legitimate run. So, yeah, that's a tough side of the bracket. Tough side. And, there's Wisconsin might make one of the play-ins here at the 12 seed, which let me look at the other ones here. In the South, he has Howard or FDU in the play-in. And on the West, he has Clemson, Boise State in the play-in. And I read off the entire Midwest, there weren't any play-ins there. So, I pulled these off today, I think. So, Andy Katz has given no love to your Wolverines 2Ks. What do you think about that?
You know, to be honest with you, with how the season has shook out, at this point right now, I mean, Michigan's biggest week is right now. This game tonight going on right now against Illinois. Later this weekend, Indiana. If they're able to somehow pull it off against both of them, to me they're in.
Michigan's leading 57-56 right now.
They're in if they're able to pull it off against both teams, especially both of them being road games. If they're able to win both of those, but at this point, you know, it's been such a frustrating season for Michigan because how many close games have they just let slip through their hands? I mean, go back earlier in the season to their loss to Virginia. It was I think ended up being a 2 or 3 point game. Their loss to North Carolina was close. Lost a game earlier this season to Indiana where they basically led the whole game and then blew it in the very end. Basically, the whole season has been that way for them, and nothing's really fell their way at the end of ball games. And so at this point right now, I can't disagree with the list. But if they're able to win a couple of these games, and say a team like Michigan State slips up, or a team like Wisconsin slips up, or Illinois slips up, to me, Michigan is going to be the team that's going to slide in.
Now, the one thing they haven't done 2Ks is let go of an 11-point lead with 1 minute to go.
Man.
And to be honest with you, that's what spurned the blog article. Because, I mean, traditionally, I mean, you said it, January, February, Izzo. This seems to be the time of year where Izzo turns it on, not gives up an 11-point lead. And you could argue the fact that, because Michigan State was a 5-point underdog going into that game, if I remember correctly. And they got off to just they couldn't miss. They could not miss. And it came down to they missed because the game went to overtime. And then in overtime, Iowa just kind of took over. And it really, really wasn't even close. But you could argue that Michigan State was fortunate enough to be in that position to give up an 11-point lead. I don't buy that at all. But, yeah, if you were a bettor, I mean, even your +5 went out the window. Even your +5 went out the window. So 2Ks, with all we've went over, and just got a text from Mr. Jeremy Warren asking if we're going to do fantasy baseball. It's TBD. And which we probably, if we are going to do that, we probably might want to get our shit together for that. But yes, to answer your other question, yes, we will be doing a bracket challenge as always. What kind of sports show would we be if we didn't have a bracket challenge? I mean, come on. I ran those for years without having a show. So hell, and everyone does it on ESPN, so it's even easier. So I don't even have to keep score. So of course. And I'm sure this is not going to be the last NCAA show we will do. So just wanted to get a little taste of it, get your whistle wetted, if you will, because it is that time. So is there anything you want to tie a bow on here, 2Ks, before we hop into our top 5 of the night?
No, I mean, that's pretty much everything. To me, there's such big games here in this final week of the regular season, and then you go into these conference tournaments. There's so many big games, so many things that can change from here until when the actual tournament does kick off. It's going to be very fun to watch. This is, when it comes to college basketball, this is the best time of the year. Like absolutely. As soon as the calendar flips over to March, this is when all these games pretty much become must-watch.
I mean, this is one of my favorite times of year. I mean, fall is my absolute favorite time. Second favorite time is right now because we've got March Madness, spring training baseball. The Masters is right around the corner. So the only time it gets better than that is, like I said, during the fall. During the fall. I did want to wrap a bow on a couple things here. Big shout out to Coach Bray.
Yeah.
Big shout out. It's been a hell of a run, dude. It's been a hell of a run. You will be missed. just because for those of you who don't know, that's Notre Dame's head basketball coach is stepping down. Did end up winning last night in his his last game at Purcell Pavilion. So hell of a send-off. Always a class act. And I'm sure that was not an easy job considering the athletes who you're getting as opposed to everyone else. And I saw on the news this morning that before the game yesterday, 2Ks, he actually went into the linebacker for the first time in 23 years of being on campus. And there was a ton of students and fans there to welcome him. So big shout out to you. Kudos and best of luck in the next chapter here, my friend. So good on you. Good on you. Notre Dame you will always be thoroughly loved in the Notre Dame faithful. So 2Ks, top 5 of the week. Top 5 of the week. And this one actually comes from 2Ks himself. And I thought that I was on board with what you sent over, and I took it to mean top, like the most dominant.
Sure.
Because I mean, when you're talking top 5, you could do obviously top 5 dominant. You could do top 5 meaning incredible runs that they went on, and we're talking about teams in year. So any sport, but it just has to be that year of the team, not just the team overall. So I took it to mean top 5 dominant teams. Now, your list, when we were talking, we didn't share each other's lists, but you kind of went a different route. So explain to me your route.
I went
and the 2K crew.
I didn't go necessarily top 5 dominant teams. I went my all-time top 5 teams that I got to watch.
Okay.
So, I mean, all 5 of them were good,
Sure.
very good teams. Not all dominant, not all championship teams, but my top 5 teams overall that I obviously am a fan of.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, give me your number 5, my friend.
Number 5. So just for starters, I'm gonna have 2 of them from the same team on here, but for the first one, I have to go with the 2012 Detroit Tigers. They fell short in the World Series to San Francisco Giants. Pablo Sandoval, those boys they just got hot at the right time, pretty much dominated. But for that, I think a lot of us Detroit Tigers fans, especially now, at the time we took it for granted that roster that they were able to put in place. I'm talking Miguel Cabrera, Prince Fielder, and Victor Martinez, JD Martinez. And then you build around with it. And then you talk about the pitching staff where you have Justin Verlander, Max Scherzer, Anibal Sanchez, Doug Fister, like just some of the Rick Porcello, some of the names that you throw off, Cy Young winners, Hall of Fame players, all on the same roster. It's unfortunate that that we let that one get away and we didn't win a championship that year, and that's why I think I have them down lower on at the 5 spot. But my second favorite Detroit Tigers team of all time, for sure.
Well, since our lists are a little bit different, how about you just run through yours and then I'll give mine.
All right. For that, at number 4, I have. Now we don't talk about this sport very often. We don't actually. I don't know if we've ever talked about this sport, but for living in the state of Michigan, and they went back to back. I believe it was 98 and 99. Detroit Red Wings hockey. Just take a second, and if any of you guys have time or shit, I think I snapped a little quick snapshot of it today.
That team was legendary.
Of the amount of Hall of Famers that were on that team, and for two consecutive years made it to the Stanley Cup, won the Stanley Cup Finals in 4 games, swept both their opponents. The first year, I believe it was the Flyers, and the next year, I think it was. I think it might have been the Caps. For some of you guys that are bigger hockey fans than me, you guys will probably know the answer to that. But I know that they swept in both. And when you start talking about the amount of Hall of Famers on those teams,
and one of them's back.
Yeah, Stevie Y, who was in charge, who was the captain then.
Signing Dylan Larkin to an extension.
And then you have the Russian 5. I mean, there was basically in hockey you play with lines. Well, they had 3 lines that were, and each line had Hall of Fame players on every one. It was. I don't know if we've ever seen a more dominant NHL team ever put together than that team alone. Those 2 Stanley Cups that they won in those 2 years. So they're lower on my list because I'm not a big-time hockey fan, and I don't know a lot about hockey, and I'm not going to sit up here and say that I do. But as far as a Detroit team that dominated, I don't know if we've ever seen a team in this
We're hockey town, dude.
the city of Detroit that's dominated like that. So they're at number 4. Number 3 for me, I have to go probably this most recent, what we've been talking about all night, Michigan basketball. 2013 basketball, I'm talking Trey Burke, won National Player of the Year that year. They get to the tournament, they're a number 3 seed, they go on a run. A lot of people thought maybe it was a year early for them to kind of go on that run, because if you remember back, Trey Burke was the sophomore, but then they had Tim Hardaway Jr., who was another upperclassman, but then they had Nick Stauskas, Mitch McGarry, Karis LeVert, a lot of young freshmen. I think I said Nick, freshmen on that team. So, but they all got hot at the right time. They got hot at the end of the season.
Is that a Wagner team?
No, he would have been on the next championship run that they made. But that team, I don't know if I'll ever forget the Trey Burke 3 against Kansas to send that game to overtime, and then they end up winning it, where Burke shoots it from 3 or 4 steps beyond the NBA 3 at the time. And knocks down that shot. Unfortunately, they come up short to Louisville in the championship. That national championship is not even a thing because it was taken away from Louisville years later because of everything that was going on there. So I think that even adds a little bit more salt to the wound. But that was kind of the Michigan basketball. We talked about it earlier. Michigan basketball was a joke. And John Beilein took over, and it took some time. And it took time for him to get his players in. It took his time to find his point guard, but Trey Burke's the best player I've seen at Michigan in my lifetime. I'm before the Fab Five. I'm before Glenn Rice, those guys. But the guy that I got to watch, Trey Burke's the best. Someday, I hope that they put number 3 up in the rafters there because he deserves it.
Right.
So they're number 3 on my list. Number 2 on my list, I have to go with 2004 Detroit Pistons. We watched it in the early '90s where teams just you beat the shit out of each other, and that's the way it was. And those Pistons national championship with Isaiah Thomas and those boys, they played bully ball. And then we had the Jordan era where rules started to change, and it was all it was the Flash, and Jordan just dominated a complete decade of NBA basketball, and he did. And I mean, greatest player, the GOAT. He's the greatest player of all time. He dominated that era. But in 2004, when Shaq and Kobe were a big deal, in LA, and Kobe was the face of the NBA at the time, and for 1 year there, we got to go back to that bully-style ball of basketball, to where the Pistons dominated not on offense, they dominated on defense. They had Ben Wallace, who was the Defensive Player of the Year. You had Rasheed Wallace. I mean, you had Tayshaun Prince, who I think will never be given the amount of credit that what he did defensively. Especially in that series.
And Rip Hamilton. And
then you had Rip Hamilton, and you had Chauncey Billups, Mr. Big Shot himself. That team was they single-handedly in 1 year turned the entire city of Detroit around, because that was a rough time for Detroit, period.
Yeah.
And the Palace was that place was full every single night that they played. It was a huge deal. They dominated that entire season. They were the best team in the NBA all year long. It went through to basically just wipe out Kobe Bryant in the middle of his prime.
Yeah, that was kind of one of the tipping points between him and Shaq.
Yeah.
And I specifically remember that team because I was at Western Michigan, living in Kalamazoo at that time, and we would go out to Firehouse every Thursday for 75-cent Busch Light bottles. And if Jay Stone's still watching, he can back me up on this. But back in that time, I was more of I was a fan of players, not a fan of any basketball teams. Huge Tim Duncan fan. So I guess if I was to pick a side, I would be a Spurs fan. But being at the bars when those Pistons playoff games were going on was insane. The only thing that irritated the shit out of me was talking to some of the people at the bar and asking them, just talking Pistons basketball, and they have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. So I said, "You never heard of the Bad Boys?" Well, no. I'm like, how the hell can you be a Pistons fan if you don't even know who the fucking bad boys are? I mean, they're the ones that laid the groundwork for this team, and now you're telling me that, oh, get out of here. Get out of here. Didn't want to interrupt your top five, but I had to interject that.
Number one for me, this one will always, I don't know if anything will ever beat it. The only thing that would have ever made it better was that this team would have won it all, won the World Series this year. But I have to go with the 2006 Detroit Tigers. Mm-hmm. I mean, for how long were the Tigers just the joke of baseball? And then all of a sudden, this guy by the name of Dave Dombrowski is in charge, and he's not afraid to spend money. Mm-hmm. And he brings in a manager, and Jim Leland, who's as old school gets. Smoking heaters in his fucking whitey tighties in his office.
Love it.
And this team that I don't think the expectation for this team was even to be a playoff caliber team. I mean, you added. You obviously in that offseason, we knew we were heading the right direction. You bring Pudge over,
which is huge. I mean, that was a turning point in Detroit Tigers baseball.
The signing of Maglio Ordonez is a big deal. Mm-hmm. So we're starting to bring in top end talent to kind of mix in. And Carlos Guillen's another signing that you brought over with that. But then you mix them in with a bunch of up-and-coming players. I'm talking Justin Verlander coming, his career just starting. Brandon Inge, a guy that had been there and been through all the really bad years. Jeremy Bonderman, Nate Robinson, pitchers that had been through all the bad years. And then there's guys that kind of come out of nowhere, like guys that we'd never had even heard of. Curtis Granderson takes off as a rookie and just goes on to have a great season. Joel Zamaya, I know it only lasted for a year, but the guy's just throwing 103, 104 gas out of the bullpen, just basically untouchable. You have the signing of Kenny Rogers. A lot of people had wrote him off at the time. He was done. Todd Jones, Roller Coaster Jones is there. You bring over Placido Polanco. He never, really took off in any other teams that he was at, but he played huge dividends.
One of the best number two hitters
in the league. Absolutely. You mix that with Craig Monroe, another guy that had been there through all the bad years. Mm-hmm. And so you just have this team that when you look at them on paper, you're like, they're all right. They're not great. Never would you have imagined that they would make it to the World Series. Unfortunately, they come across a team who I thought legitimately was the best team in baseball that year. In the Cardinals, you have Albert Pujols, so at that time was the best player in baseball. Yeah, and they ran into that team. That team was better than them. They ended up going and winning the World Series. But that, to me, was what put Tigers baseball back on the map for that time. I know now, talking about it in 2023, it doesn't mean that much. But that little 8, 9, 10-year run that the Tigers went on was all started on that year. And I think that's why this team will always go down as my favorite team in sports, not only Tigers history, but in all of sports history, because as me, a diehard Tigers fan, a diehard baseball fan, I grew up watching the shit, just a joke of the Detroit Tigers, basically my entire life until this happened right here. So.
Yeah, and if that season never happens, there's a whole series of things that never happen. And a whole lot of players don't go there. I mean, getting Pudge there kind of broke the ice because that was the first, big free agent. I mean, what was his name? Bobby Higginson was the lone representative in the All-Star game for. I mean, he was probably a 5-time All-Star just because he was the best player on the shitty team,
and never would have been an All-Star really with anybody else. But
no, but if
that's what you're exactly right. That's what started, and that's why we were so fortunate in 2009, 2010, 11, 12, 13 to get Miguel Cabrera there. To be able to watch Miguel Cabrera, Prince Fielder, JD Martinez, Victor Martinez, to watch those four guys bat in the same lineup back to back to back to back. We don't understand how fortunate we were to be able to watch that kind of talent, that loaded talent. Unfortunately, the thing that will always be held over that, they never won a World Series.
Yeah, I agree, but it's sure fun as hell to watch. But I'll give you a rundown of my top 5. Like I said, mine was top 5.
Not to cut you off, Michigan, Illinois heading to overtime.
And they didn't blow an 11-point lead, I'm sure, in the last minute. I went the avenue of just top 5 greatest teams. I know I threw out the word dominant there earlier, but just the best teams that I've seen. And my number 5 is the 15-16 Golden State Warriors. I mean, kind of hard to argue that. I'm going to be kind of contradictory here a little later on in the list, but this was a badass team.
Oh,
this was an absolutely badass team. 73-9. 73-9. Going through an 80-game season, losing less than 10 games is just... And I remember watching this team and rooting against them just because I didn't want them to break the Bulls record, because I was a huge Bulls fan, huge Michael Jordan fan. So that they have to be that dominant and that good. And you'll see that they made my list, but that badass New England team that went undefeated until they ran into Eli did not make my list.
The helmet catch. The
helmet catch. Yes, the helmet catch. The David Tyree, his 15 seconds of fame, go down in infamy in history. But yeah, that's my number 5.
Huge.
My number 4. And like I said, this is kind of bouncing all over. The women's Huskies, 2013-2014. You might be asking yourself, well, Turbo, you follow your women's basketball? I mean, this was at the height of Muffet McGraw and her run at Notre Dame. And there's a little article here, a little snippet said, women's college basketball unfortunately doesn't get the attention it deserves, but this UConn Huskies team is an exception to the rule. The UConn women of 2013-2014 finished their season perfect record 40-0. But wait, it gets better. They won every single game by scoring an average of 34 points more than their opponents, 2Ks, including eight games by more than 50. During the fight for the national championship, the Huskies crushed the previously undefeated team from Notre Dame. So, yes, they beat my Irish. I would have loved to see Muffet get more championships than she did, but Gino Ariema was a machine back then. So, someone that's a team that's that good. And this is kind of the last couple of years, first kind of chinks in Gino's armor that we've seen. I mean, he's been top of the list, creme de la creme, however you want to slice and dice it. But he's had some teams. And for only one to make the list, I think is pretty huge. Number 3. This one pains my heart, 2Ks. Pains my heart. 98 Yankees.
Yeah.
You talk about a loaded squad that probably should have more Hall of Famers than what they have. I mean, obviously you got Mo Rivera. You got Jeets. Pretty sure Andy Pettitte was on there. You could the list goes on and on and on and on. I think they won 120 games that year. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. And as a Red Sox fan, that does make my heart heavy. But in my elder years, I've learned to appreciate greatness, and that was one of them. That was one of them. Number 2 on the list, and this is where I'm going to get kind of contradictory, is that 95-96 Bulls team. And the reason I think they're so much higher on the list than Golden State, even though Golden State broke their record, was how much they brought basketball to the forefront. I mean, essentially what the Fab Five did for Michigan basketball, this Bulls team did for NBA basketball worldwide. And it says, were the Chicago Bulls of 95 and 96 the greatest team ever to step onto a court? There are many who would answer that with an emphatic yes. Thanks to dominant players like Dennis Rodman, before he started dyeing his hair, Scottie Pippen, and the great Michael Jordan, the Bulls finished the season with 72 regular wins and only 10 losses. Perhaps even more impressive is the fact that this particular team is often credited with a massive influx in NBA popularity worldwide. Just going on what I said. And last but not least, 2Ks, this one to me, you cannot argue. You might say it's a little niche. with the 92 Olympic basketball team.
Yeah.
By far hands down, the greatest team ever assembled. Ever assembled.
Yeah. Oh, incredible.
And they've been, and that was the first year that NBA players were allowed to compete at the Olympics because they were not amateur. They didn't have amateur status. They were getting paid. So for the Olympic Committee to actually open this up was, I remember I was 12 years old, watched every single one of those games, and was just enamored. Just enamored. I think on top of that, what makes this team just by far the best team is the stories afterwards that are coming out even now about the practices, about what just hanging out with that team. If you look at the combination of that team, excuse me, I caught between a burp, and there was some pretty stout international competition. If you remember the story about Tony Kukoc,
Mm-hmm.
when that team was playing Kukoc's team, Jordan said, "I want to lock him down," because the Bulls were projected to sign him or draft him or whatever it was, and he completely embarrassed Tony Kukoc, which is one of the top international players at the time. So, to me, granted, we've had NBA players since. Could you argue that the competition internationally has risen a level or 5? Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if you, in 92, there might have been just 2 or 3 international players, if any. I'm pretty sure, that's pre-Yao Ming, that's just right off the top of the dome. That's the earliest one I can remember. And the rest of the world kind of had to catch up. And they did in a big way. Granted, some of it was some of the top tier players weren't competing, rightfully so. But the '93 men's basketball team, or '92, excuse me.
Yep.
Dream
team.
Yeah,
Dream team.
The dream team.
Yep.
And somehow Chris Mullen made the dream team. But just to kind of, if you guys are really really young and have no idea what I'm talking about,
Christian Leitner.
Yeah, and that was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of people on this team that did not want him on the team. Some of the guys on there: Jordan, Pippen, Malone, Magic, Larry Bird, Patrick Ewing, Chris Mullen, Charles Barkley, among others.
All Hall of Famers that you just named up.
Oh yeah. Over the course of the games, the United States advanced to the gold medal game by beating each opponent by an average of 44 points per game. The Dream Team ultimately won the goal against Croatia with a score of 117 to 85. Which, if I remember correctly, that 117 was a very low score for that team. And the 85 points scored against was a whole lot closer than what any other team was. Which, it's a gold medal game, and you should have 2 best teams. And that's my list. Go ahead and drop in your comments. Who did we miss? Who do you agree with? Let us know. And if you guys have
no hate on Mullen, because he's a Hall of Famer too.
No, he is.
He's not only a Hall of Famer for being on the '92 Dream Team. He's also individual NBA Hall of Famer too.
And probably in the flat top haircut Hall of Fame as well.
I gotta tell you, what shocks me a little bit is that you left off 2018 Boston Red Sox.
I did.
A team that, if you 108 wins, completely dominated that playoff. Like, there wasn't even times where you thought that they were in trouble.
No.
And I think, and I don't know this for sure, and probably you do know, I think that they have the biggest run differential of any playoff run in the history of baseball.
At least in the last 10 or 15 years, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. 10 or 15 years previous to that, yes. As far as all time, that I'm not really sure. But, I was actually looking for more. I was looking for kind of some more just diverse teams, something that I figured you wouldn't tee off on. But once I got digging, I'm like, hey, yes, great team. That 98 Yankees team is even better.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's hard to argue that.
And with the Golden State team, they're going to have at least 3 Hall of Famers come off that team. And they have the best record in the history of the NBA. Got to put them on the list. Do you notice there weren't any football teams? There weren't any football teams. Just because it's with previous 16 games, now 17 games, it's hard to have. It's easier to put like a quote unquote dynasty tag on a team, and in my opinion, it's even easier to rank players as opposed to teams. So, but the one team that I would put on there would be the '85 Bears. The only reason I didn't is because the defense laden with Hall of Famers. You could throw in a couple of those 49er teams with Joe Montana. Obviously, top to bottom on both sides of the ball, laden with Hall of Famers. You could argue that some of the Steve Young 49er teams, same way. But as far as in a lot of the recent ones, I mean, a lot of the recent ones, you got to give them time. I mean, it's yes, I know we're talking about seasons, yes. But could you say Kansas City had one of the best seasons in NFL history? No. They had one of the best seasons in their history.
Sure.
Yeah. And to win a title, do you have to have one of the best seasons in your sports history? No, not at all. Not at all. But there's certain ones that stand out.
Yeah.
And rightfully so.
You talk about a dominant, like if we were talking all-out dominant, wow, this game's got to cut off here real quick, but there's 20 seconds left, tied 81-81. Michigan has the ball.
Do they go to double overtime in college?
Nope, this is the first overtime here.
But do they go to double overtime?
Yeah, they will. Yep.
Because I didn't think they left it as a tie.
Nope. What are we going to get?
See, I'm watching it too. Maybe I could flip over here.
They're going to get Illinois is going to get a look at the. Oh, they didn't even get a shot off. So it's going to go to double overtime. But if you look at like a college, if we want to talk about football dominant team, I look at that LSU team just a few years back when you got Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow as your quarterback who won the Heisman. You have two wide receivers who we talk about now, 5 years later, as the two best wide receivers in the NFL, and Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson on that team. And just the buco talent that team had alone that translated to the NFL. And that's one of the the most amazing college football teams that I think I've ever seen assembled. So and then kind of getting back to my list where obviously I talked about all teams that I'm a fan of here. I really wanted to put Michigan's football team in this year, and I think if Michigan doesn't shit the bed against TCU, I think they're probably going to be in my top 5 list. But that loss to TCU where no one can tell me they weren't the better team. They just came out and beat themselves that game, and so I think that's why they're left off my list. Regardless, if they would have beat TCU, I don't know. I don't expect them to go beat Georgia. I just think Georgia's on a whole different level right now. I agree. I think it would have been a better game too, but the TCU loss just kind of blew it for me. Like nothing. I'm not trying to take anything away. You still won the Big Ten. You still beat Ohio State twice in a row. You beat Ohio State on the road. Like that will never be taken away from that team. But you didn't show up in the playoff game against TCU, and I think that's what leaves them off my top 5.
Sure, but I mean, and especially if they go on to beat TCU and then beat Georgia, I mean, they have to be. I mean, probably inching close to that number 1 spot at that point. We had 2K crew. Let us know. Who do you agree? Can't really agree with me or agree with him, but because our lists were kind of different. But if there's one that we left off, let us know. Let us know and drop it in the comments. Love to hear your input. And again, thanks for all your support. 2Ks. You got anything to wrap up here, brother? I think we've hit it all.
No, we got a doozy here. As far as this Michigan-Illinois game, they're getting ready to tip off the second overtime. And kind of to wrap up off of that, the comment earlier as far as is Howard on the hot seat. And another reason why I say no is this team has lost so many close games, and regardless of what happens tonight, regardless of what happens on Sunday night against Indiana, there was a lot of times in this season where they could have just chalked it up as this is not the year. And for them to be playing at this level to where I think they're starting to play their best basketball the whole season here down the stretch in the most important time of the year, this team hasn't given up, and so the hope that they are showing, to me, that's the reason why I don't think Juwan Howard's even close to being on the hot seat.
Facebook user says Nolan says hi, Dad. Wonder who that is.
I wonder.
Hi, Frank. What's up, Nolan? How we doing, buddy? Isn't it past your bedtime?
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say. He doesn't. Nolan doesn't have school on Fridays though, so he kind of has. He has the reins to do whatever he wants on these Thursday nights, and pretty much every night that I get home from podcasting, he's keeping my spot warm in the bed.
Hey, nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. Well, 2K Crew will get you out of here on this. Everyone have a fantastic weekend and even better week. We will see you this time next week. And as always, Jim Rome, we're coming for you.